Most women in prison are mothers who are incarcerated for nonviolent drug-related offenses, and many are young and poor and caught in a struggle to afford food and housing for their children. Even with all the resources, love, and family support that I received while I was incarcerated, my husband, for example, drove my children 4 hours there and 4 hours back every Saturday so I could spend a few hours a week in the prison visiting room. When I went to prison, my son was 5 months old. My youngest daughter was 12 years old. When I returned home, my son was 2. With all these resources and support I had, still upon my return, it took me more than a year to begin to recover. I could not get off of my couch. The experience of being in prison is incredibly emotionally and physically exhausting. Imagine what that experience is like for someone with no resources available upon their release, no money, no housing, and limited employment opportunities. For women released who are mothers, they must navigate the process of proving their ability to parent in order to regain custody of their children, who they are desperate to reunite with, but can only do so after finding somewhere to live with no money and a criminal record that most often precludes them from receiving public assistance or the housing required to regain custody or visitation of their children. In Massachusetts, a person cannot receive food assistance for the first 6 months immediately following their release. Their housing eligibility is limited, and conviction of a drug offense, not a driving offense or driving under the influence, but just for being convicted of a drug offense in Massachusetts, carries a collateral penalty of loss of the person's driver's license and a steep fee, as we've heard earlier, imposed to have it reinstated. Incarceration is incredibly exhausting and often insurmountable due to post-incarceration barriers imposed on people already depleted of everything that keeps them locked in a cycle of poverty and incarceration. Prisons are full of people whose offenses should not require incarceration, as that environment is far too destructive overall. Many people are sitting in prison for things that would be much more effectively addressed through restorative justice and community wellness approaches. Crippled by the fiscal weight of mass incarceration, mostly caused by the drug war, many states are now paying attention to the evidence-based models that repeatedly demonstrate that for non-violent offenses, filling our prisons and building more and more to house non-violent offenders is not the answer and is becoming hugely unsustainable. Overall in this country, we have 2.5 million people in prison, mostly for nonviolent drug offenses. And I want to point out there are millions more people who are under the yoke of the criminal justice system, cycling constantly in and out of prison due to the very harsh collateral consequences of parole and probation. Mostly for nonviolent drug offenses, they are serving on average 5 to 10-year sentences, and just as many are going in and out of county jails, caught in the unforgiving cycle of probation violations. Thankfully, along came attorney Michelle Alexander's book, and her book, The New Jim Crow, that speaks the language of our progressive, educated elite here in Massachusetts and around the country. She made the case that we have not ended racial caste in America, we have merely redesigned it. In her book, Ms. Alexander demonstrates that by targeting black men through the war on drugs and decimating communities of color, the United States criminal justice system functions as a contemporary system of racial control, relegating millions to a permanent second-class status. And here, still in Massachusetts, we have been lulled into a state of brilliant ignorance. Having always touted the reputation of being a state endowed with some of the best institutions of higher learning and some of the most progressive thinkers in the country, we have allowed ourselves to simply believe that we are at the forefront of criminal justice reform and all that is good unjust, if we have given it any thought at all. And yet, here in Massachusetts, even as states including Oklahoma, Maine, and Texas have started reducing their incarcerated populations with more effective community wellness strategies to reduce crime and recidivism. And even though there exist alternatives to create the needed changes in our criminal justice system here in Massachusetts that have the potential for significant cost savings, increase in public safety, and improved access to justice for all residents in our state, Massachusetts instead has enacted mandatory minimum sentences for drugs and has allocated $550 million of bond revenue for expanding and building jails here. I'm almost through my talk. Millions of dollars spent to expand the Chicopee Women's Jail have just been allocated, and $37 million allocated to the expansion of the Billerica House of Correction for men by adding 500 temporary beds. In Middlesex County, those have just been done, so we have them now. They expanded the women's jail in Chicopee, and they've expanded the men's jail in Billerica. They closed the Cambridge jail, and they moved all the men to Billerica. We have it. We've expanded the beds. But still, in Middlesex County, for instance, where even more jails are being proposed, most of the crowding in the jails is caused by people who have not been convicted of anything, but simply cannot afford a small bail of even $100. The Framingham Women's Jail is crowded with awaiting trial women who do not need to be held, but many simply cannot make bail. Just a couple of days held away from their children, apartments, and jobs can destroy the stability of a family permanently. And whether a person can make bail or not has absolutely nothing to do with public safety. A person walking around with bad and violent intentions who has a pocket full of money can make bail, while a poor woman struggling with addiction who is picked up for prostitution too often does not have the money for her bail. These are many of the women new jails are being proposed for. Places like Washington, D.C. have completely ended their monetary bail system with no increase in crime or decrease in public safety. I'm going to end with just saying a few things very quickly about where do we begin the process of criminal justice reform. Well, all of you here today have already started. You've already begun just coming here, and many of you I know who are here today are very actively engaged in different projects around criminal justice reform. One of the projects is our pretrial working group, which is a statewide organization developing and implementing pretrial alternatives to incarceration. And there's a lot of information in the back of the room. We have some flyers about the pretrial working group that is open to anybody to come and to share in the work that we're doing and to let us know how we can be supportive of whatever work that you are doing. Smart and effective change is possible. We have the responsibility to ensure that the amount of money a person does not have does not affect the kind of justice they receive in our state. We believe no new jail construction should proceed until bail reform and other pretrial diversion programs are implemented. We must address the racial disparities within our criminal justice system. Our current criminal justice legislation is built on a framework of racism, and it must be dismantled. Let no more time pass before we correct the injustices that, if allowed to continue, will only further marginalize those among us who are the most vulnerable at a cost of billions of Massachusetts taxpayer dollars. As Jesus stated, "Whatever you did unto one of the least, you did unto me." Our true being within all of us is one of love. It is the God in us all. For our collective well-being, we must commit ourselves to those actions that help people who are hurting to heal. Surely we are smart enough and compassionate enough to create better solutions than the proven, ineffective choice of putting more and more people into more and more prisons. Thank you.